Let's start. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon, good morning, and welcome to Regenerative Agriculture at Scale, Business Model and Market Reality. Unfortunately, the room is not so crowded like yesterday, but we will have time eventually to ask questions, to wreak havoc about the panel. What are we going to talk today? Of course, we're going to talk about regenerative agriculture, a so hyped topic, and of course, by the reverse side of the medal, even so controversial. In particular, we're gonna discuss how to turn all these massive information projects into viable products and projects for farmers. Because you will agree with me, the fact that food behemoths, the big food, are open a spotlight on regag, let's say, it's good, but now it's time even for farmers. And we will do with a so heterogeneous panel. So probably I don't know if we will see the blood, but people love the blood, so why not? But I would like just to open and ask a little question and a little presentation of each speaker. And Christine, let's start with you. In one sentence, what's the missing piece that's stopping regag from scaling? And who's responsible for putting it in place? So present yourself and then answer your question.
Hello, everyone. Thanks for bringing the energy to this session. Agriculture really is the coolest sector in the world. It does have the word culture in it. My name is Christine Gould. I've been working in food systems really my entire life, professionally for 2 decades, across multinationals, across scale-ups, across startups, all over the world. And now with my new company, GigaFutures, what we're doing is really bringing action to the plans that we all, know are possible, right? And so we are a strategy and execution firm. We work with governments, we work with investors, we work with corporations, and we connect the dots to build the market architectures that allow all of the things that we need to do to come to life. So we really build the solutions around regenerative agriculture. We align the incentives, we build the markets, and we make it happen. So you asked, again, what was the one sentence I'm supposed to answer?
What's the missing piece that's stopping regag from scaling, and who's responsible for putting in place?
So I think that regenerative ag is something that we no longer need to say we need to do it, we need to do it, right? Like it's, we know it's necessary, and now it's about designing the market architectures to make it possible. And so we can dive into what that means more specifically in the conversation. So you said in one sentence. And who's responsible?
Yes.
Yeah, who's responsible? I mean, I think actually everyone is responsible, and we need to move the conversation around making it just a farmer responsibility into something that is shared across different actors, again, so that incentives are aligned and we're not putting the burden of the cost and the effort on the people that don't have the money and don't have the margins. So yeah, let's dive into that, what that means more specifically, but I don't want to take up too much time right now.
Thank you. Christina, Hirander, it's your turn. It's up to you.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Hirander Misra. I'm the chairman and CEO of a company called 013. And what does 013 do? I mean, we realized actually that water, energy, food security were big challenges. And we looked at 2 aspects to address that. Platform enablement, the digital rails, but also, you mentioned what's needed to scale, capital, right? Because on regen agriculture, we've been involved in a number of projects, let's say the Cap-to-Gap Integrated Forest Program in Kenya, and the biggest elephant in the room was a lack of capital. Yet the projects were there, but the projects weren't packaged in a way that investors understood, and investors wanted a return. Rather than equity, they wanted yield. So we address this, and we address this through connectivity and then also benefiting communities as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Hirander. Dan?
Hi, my name is Dan Kittredge. I run the Bionutrient Food Association and Bionutrient Institute. We coined this term nutrient density to refer to the nutritional variation in food. I tell people that if they've eaten a tomato off of the supermarket shelf in January and one out of a garden in August, they know the difference between, they know that there's a difference between those 2 tomatoes. That difference in flavor is a difference in nutrition, which is 5x, 10x, 20x, or more, depending on the nutrient. It is absolutely massive. And so our work is to characterize that nutritional variation to build 1 to 100 nutritional standard. So we can say this tomato sits on the 25th percentile or the 80th percentile. We do that with wheat, potatoes, beef, etc. And then basically build biomarkers that can be calibrated to instrumentation. So it looks like before the end of the decade, you will have in your phone the ability to flash a light at food and read its nutritional spectrum and choose off the shelf the one that is more nutritious and leave on the shelf the one that is less nutritious. Our proposition is we can use the market and the visceral incentive of the consumer to have their family be healthier, to pull through the supply chain the regenerative outcome. So foundationally, I would say the economic incentive is not yet there aligned. In many cases, I would say it's ignorance about how to work with nature that is the impediment. Most farmers have been trained in an reductionist mechanistic paradigm. They don't understand how plants evolved to grow. They don't understand that microbes evolved plants. And until you understand that the microbiome was at the foundation of all things in life and how to support the microbiome, you'll never accomplish success.
Thank you. Then, what do you do? I think very interesting. But one question about a blogger. I'm a food tech blogger, so no any scientific background. With your technology, switching to regenerative agriculture, would it be possible to even to calculate or to boost even CO2 absorption? But you work on nutrients of the plants. It's possible eventually to measure even the absorption of CO2 with your technology?
I suppose you could. I mean, our prototype first generation meter that we built, that we got published in Nature, could measure carbon in the soil as well. Spectroscopy is a science. It's how the Hubble Space Telescope works. So we can read the atmosphere of a planet 10,000 light years away with a flash of light. We know that planet 10,000 light years away has methane in it, not by going there and sampling it, but by reading the frequency of light coming off of it. All things in chemistry, whether it's protein or carbohydrates or copper or zinc or vitamin B12, is a vibration in physics. So all carbon molecules vibrate. So spectroscopy can be used to measure anything.
Let's animate discussion.
Yeah, I mean, I can answer that from a practical standpoint because we're doing a lot of work on generation of carbon credits, right? And the point made there is source to sale provenance, because we've lost that connection with where our food comes from. But equally, it's very difficult to measure a carbon credit. There's been a lot of greenwashing and double counting. And how do you know this piece of air is valuable, right? And this one is worthless as well, right? And that all comes from these types of technologies. So what we've been doing, we weren't experts in what we call digital measurement, reporting, verification, but we integrated up that chain digital reporting mechanisms, whether it's satellite, drone, on the ground, sensoring, but also combine that with digital registries as well as traditional registries. And now with the life cycle of those credits, including the use of blockchain technology that we used with a multi-blockchain approach, you can now see what encapsulated into that instrument and go all the way up to source. That gave downstream the market a lot of confidence that these things were real and corporates buying them, which actually substantially increased the price. And we'll delve into some of those stats later.
Hirander, and the problems you exposed can be defined as the causes sometimes cyclically carbon credits market collapsing and then born again. There are probably for the problem you exposed.
Yeah, I mean, the biggest problem, I mean, I come from about 30 years in markets before I got into kind of carbon sustainability and agriculture the last few years, like 4 or 5 years. And the biggest challenge is it isn't really an asset class. Everyone speaks of it as a market, but people were confusing this with a no offtake, no pricing. I mean, ultimately, investment and secondary trading comes from an asset that's desirable, right? And packaged in a form that investors understand. Whereas this carbon credit project was very different to this one and this one. So we had to do a bit of work packaging and standardizing that and then applying what we call common pricing or indexation on it, and creating products such as equities and yield-bearing bonds that investors could buy and understand. So on Borsa Italiana or other markets, you can then trade them and invest in them as well as privately.
Okay. Christine, would you like adding, or do you have your own thoughts about this topic?
Well, I have worked for a couple of scale-up companies working in carbon credits. It's a super interesting space that, as you said, faced a kind of downturn in recent years due to greenwashing claims. And obviously, there's a lot of considerations around additionality and things like this that need to be taken into consideration. But the point is, agriculture, when done right, can be a huge carbon sink. It can be a solution for some of the, carbon issues and methane issues and nitrogen issues that contribute to climate change if we so design it that way. And the nice thing too about the carbon markets is, it was giving farmers a chance to get paid to, move into this transition. One of the things that I think is really important that I highlighted in my introductory remarks is that we make this transition something that is possible, because it's one thing, we all know, all of the data shows it, that we need to be focusing on enhancing our depleted soils, that we need to be protecting water and biodiversity. This is not even just about ESG and sustainability. It is about national security. It's about resiliency. These are real issues we need to address now. But for many farmers around the world, the transition is something that is going to take investment and costs. And so when I talked about building market architectures, that's how do we make it possible, for them to take that on. And that requires, of course, capital, as you said, but it requires more than that, right? And that's what I've seen. I was, over the past decade, helping to bring to life and scale very promising startups that could, move us toward more regenerative agriculture. Many of them were invested in, many of them formed partnerships with leading industry players, but many of them, most of them, are stuck in what I call pilot purgatory and unable to scale their impact with the urgency that we need them to. So what we've crafted in our program now with GigaFutures is something I call the 4 C's, which, of course, the first one is capital, as you said, and it's building the right capital stack, right? So we need some combination of patient capital with catalytic capital, and eventually VC can come in. But when you start with VC, it's usually not the right fit for this technology, given the biological timelines and needs and realities of agriculture. That's a whole other discussion. The second C is around commercial pull, and that means identifying customers that are going to be the buyers for solutions that regenerative farming makes possible. So that can be premium markets, right? And we've seen some success stories there. We talked yesterday in one of the sessions around how we help decommodify wheat products by helping farmers adopt more carbon-friendly farming practices and biological inputs, which increase the protein content in wheat, which millers paid a premium for. But it can also be around buyers that are looking for more secure supply chains, right? And so regenerative ag helps them to achieve that. Resiliency is the name of the game. So when they are vertically integrating their supply chains as a food company, they help their farmers, be more productive in a more sustainable way. The third C is cultural pull, and that means actually creating social license to operate. I think we all agree that regenerative agriculture is something that is exciting and motivating, consumers want to support, but we need to understand transparently what it stands for. We need to have the right policies and regulations in place, and we need to have consumers excited to buy it. And the last C is capabilities, and that's just around making sure farmers know what to do, that they have access to innovations, they know how to use those innovations, if it's digital tools, MRV tools. I even have a controversial view that I think, advanced genetics and gene-edited crops should be part of the transition. So altogether, those 4 Cs are going to unlock and make possible regenerative ag.
I think I'll just say this as a at the outset. We were tasked, or we were requested to be bringing up conflict or be in disagreement with each other. So I'm gonna take that opportunity. My opinion is that carbon being monetized is a perversion of what we should be doing. I completely grant the point of climate extremes and imbalances. My understanding of the science is that the water cycle is a much more powerful and visceral force in balancing climate than the carbon cycle, and that in fact, with balancing of the water cycle, we can cool the planet in years, not decades or centuries. So it seems to me that the focus on carbon has been one primarily driven by those wishing to monetize nature and drive more extreme profit, not necessarily to optimize system function for all beings. So it seems to me that the regenerative ag has been driven by this carbon conversation, and I think we really should be focusing on the question of health and well-being and system function, ecosystem function. As a farmer myself, as someone who's been educating farmers around the planet for more than 15 years about how to work with nature, I do not agree that we need significant capital to transition. I think the issue is understanding about how nature works. Even though it's true that I think premiums will be offered to those producing superior nutritional quality food, I argue that the benefit economically, primarily for the farmer, comes from a decreased cost of production. That foundationally, nature is more efficient than technology. I do not agree that we need high-tech solutions. I think that actually, if we look to nature, we actually have everything that we need to operate at a much higher level of function. And one of the impediments to that transition is the fact that the resources necessary to accomplish that are prevalent everywhere, are effectively free, and can't be monetized to extreme profit. Things like rock dust, things like basalt or granite or sea salt that have the full spectrum of elements at the core of enzyme cofactors that are critical for biological system functions are what the continents and the oceans are made from. There's no economic incentive, really, in educating farmers that 2 tons of granite dust at $2 a ton is what your hectare of land needs to have its minerals rebalanced, and you'll never need to add fertilizer again. There is no systemic economic incentive in that for someone who's trying to maximize at 3x or 5x in 5 years. So the real question for me is, what's our agenda? Is our agenda to empower, to heal, to solve systemic solutions, or is it to optimize returns? And so, I would propose that this is where we should be focusing. I do believe that the open source, that the blockchain, that big data, that IoT sensors, that all these sort of tech has a powerful role in this system solution framework. If we can actually be collecting data on every farm, on every continent, at every scale, and sharing it openly, all farmers everywhere can discern what the things are that work most well, that are most efficient, that cause the best results. That does not need to be something that's proprietarily black boxed, that is turned into a, an Uber unicorn company that can actually powerfully empower hundreds of millions of smallholders globally. So the real question is, what's our agenda? Is it profit? Are we constantly trying to focus things on the market, return framing, or are we trying to actually systemically heal?
Just here, I'm going to, just a couple of points. I'm going to agree and disagree as well. I mean, there's a lot of good points there to unpack. So you're absolutely right. I mean, there have been a lot of fraudulent carbon credits as well and bad actors, but we've seen that in financial markets, we've seen that in crypto as well. And really, I mean, when we looked at this, we realized, I mean, some of the conclusions we were drawing there was, yeah, this isn't really an asset class. It might have started with good intentions, but it's kind of been used by bad actors. So when we looked at certain projects, let's say in the Great Rift Valley, the Cap to Gap program that we looked at, everyone was obsessed with planting trees and generating carbon credits. We said, actually, it's a cart before the horse, right? Let's flip that round. Let's look at the type of soil. Let's look at the ecosystem, and let's look at what can be grown there that can generate income for the local community. So we looked at high-value crops, tea, coffee, macadamia, avocados, and really focused production around those crops. And then the carbon credits became a nice-to-have byproduct, right? If they happened, great. If they didn't, then so be it. But actually, with that approach, ROI increased about 25% with the carbon credits, but it wasn't the be-all and end-all. So I think we've got to look at this objectively. Now, another example where you're absolutely right. All the inputs are around us, but then everything's become commercial. I mean, we could argue that with there's other panels on medicine as well, and holistic medicine versus Western medicine. That debate can go on. But we did a pilot in Malawi pre-COVID, which was quite interesting. So we worked with the independent local agricultural exchange, ACE, and we did a pilot with 48,000 smallholder farmers, because what we found is at the farm gate, they were selling their products at 10 cents on the dollar. They didn't really know where the market pricing was. And then you had the large futures exchanges in the US setting the price. So all of a sudden, something very simple. We were sending prices to their dumb and smartphones, so they knew what the price of that commodity was in terms of wholesaling it or selling it to wholesalers, and then in turn. All of a sudden, that also allowed them, with what we were doing, access to local collection points as well. So they weren't just selling because they needed to get rid of that commodity. Some of it's perishable as well. And the other problem was the banks, even with security, were lending locally at 30% interest rates, which is crazy. So they couldn't buy enough inputs anyway, whether they needed natural fertilizer or otherwise. So we brought in investors that reduced the costs of that borrowing. And you could argue it's not low, but it was about 11%, but still substantially a third of what they were paying. So they could buy better quality inputs, even if they didn't increase the level of inputs as well. Now, with that output increased, and this is kind of the next cycle, and we increased our incomes over 30%. We wanted to scale that, and then, locally, when people realize that they can make profit from this and governments are involved, we kind of hit some buffers and challenges. But just by electronifying that process, the warehouse receipts, the financing, we're able to have a tangible impact. Now, so, if we touch upon some points made there, if we can scale this and try and overcome vested interest, I mean, there's a substantial improvement here.
Okay, no, thank you. That was very, very good. Despite the different backgrounds, you agree on this intro. You looks to be everybody agrees on what the other said. That's very, very good. Christina, let's start again with you, just to make a picture of what means today regenerative agriculture and what are the biggest challenges. You partially already replied to this question, but just to have a flow of answers, or even people can understand, so can have a broader view. Probably now you're starting collision question.
Yeah, sure. I think regenerative agriculture, we're getting very hung up on definitions of what it is, but at its essence, regeneration is getting better, right? And we've had a very extractive model of industrial agriculture. Hasn't always been that way, as Dan pointed out. I mean, we've had indigenous systems that have worked with nature, but the industrial model that has scaled and built the food system that most of us are interacting with on a daily basis is extractive by design, right? We built the food system because we wanted to focus on yields and shelf stability. And now we have the chance to build a new food system that is regenerative, e.g. getting better. One of the things, and I'm not trying to, because people are still getting their heads around regenerative, and there's lots of fights in the industry about what the definition of it is. But I actually think that we need to even go further and think about a concept. I've been doing some writing on this, but is anti-fragile agriculture. And this term of anti-fragility means that through uncertainty and through volatility, you get stronger. You actually use complexity as a design tool. It's not a bug, it's a feature. And I think that nature is inherently complex and elegant. And I think that with that, we can find incredible new possibilities to build solutions that haven't been possible before through the convergence of tradition and technology, science and wisdom. It's going to lead us to a new paradigm. And that really, really excites me. Another thing I want to point out is that regenerative is very contextual. In my definition of it, it is outcomes-based. It's not practice-based. If you compare it to things like organic agriculture, that's very, very mandated, what you're allowed to use, what you're not allowed to use. It has practices and protocols that are defined. But I think regenerative, you need to look at the locality and what is really needed in that particular crop, in that context, in that environment, in that culture, and define regeneration. I think you have seen in my interventions have a science-forward kind of perspective on this. Again, blending agronomy with technology, but not technology as you've seen it before. Like the industrial scale blockbuster technology, winner takes all, is not going to be the future. We have more decentralized innovation. that data can connect, and that's super interesting, right? You have local solutions. And we saw in the program that I was running before, nodes of innovation were sharing knowledge and best practices with each other rather than just, use my solution in your particular environment. And that creates a new possibility of scaling.
And I think sharing knowledge should be at the base in such
Absolutely.
challenging environment like regenerative agriculture. Sharing knowledge and best practice.
Sharing knowledge and best practice, and back to this concept of open source. I mean, I've been a huge advocate of that. Even when I worked at one of the biggest R&D multinational agribusinesses, we open sourced some of our patented technologies to help propel the industry forward. It was a game-changing initiative. I'm bringing more of that. During COVID, we set up the COVID Climate Collaboration Collective. I love the word C, apparently, the letter C. But like this type of open collaborative nature has propelled industries like software. It's happened in medicine. I think, the biohacker movement is super interesting. I engage a lot with them, and we need to be doing more of that in the regenerative space and not get hung up on this is the one definition of what it is, but keep this outcomes focus about getting better.
Oh, thank you, Regina. Hirander, what's now regenerative, the main challenges, the main problems today facing regenerative agriculture?
Yeah, I mean, even whether you like them or not, I mean, the World Bank recently estimated that, I mean, there are a lot of pilots in regen agriculture, but only about 10% actually scale. So there's a lot of challenges because what you find is with a lot of those pilots, and we speak about profit versus not profit, but they're not for profit, or they're part of kind of ESG directives and corporate social responsibility with the large corporates, and the problem is it becomes a chicken and egg problem, right? So you're right. I mean, ultimately, this asset needs to be desirable. But what we found is actually, on one hand, there's kind of mono and large scale agriculture, and we do a lot of work in Africa. To a large part, it's primarily a smallholder economy. But we found now that we've got to do a combination of things. I agree actually with Christine that data is key as well, because I was on a talk in Rabat where we spoke about kind of commodities value chain and a couple of things, owning not only the commodities but also having control of the data that governs those commodities, or access to that data, as I mentioned in the Malawi example. The other thing, I mean, I like C's too. So Christine kind of mentions 4 C's. I have 7 C's actually that we talk about, just like the 7 C's, but 7 C's. So they're different, but there's 1 or 2 in common. So, climate is really, really important, whether the US administration thinks so or not. But, broadly, we know there's data out there. Carbon credits, I mean, they're part of the ecosystem, whether you like them or not. Commodities, because, we're speaking about some of these. Connectivity, because, whether it's data, whether it's then decentralization, which is very, very interesting. And I was with NVIDIA just in Rabat as well. Connectivity is key. Capital, I've already mentioned. And then communities, because they're often forgotten. And yet we know that with the Malawi project and in Kenya, there's been tangible impact and funds earmarked for community development in a way that makes them profitable in terms of livelihood rather than just aid. And countries, which also incorporate companies as well. Because from a sovereign perspective, policies are really important. I mean, we work with a lot of governments behind the scenes, not for paid consulting, because it opens up the market infrastructure and allows that whole cycle that you mentioned to flow.
Thank you, Hirander. Share the microphone. Oh, Dan, what's mean regenerative agriculture now? What could be the main challenges and problems facing in the sector?
Yeah, I've got a little bit of a different context on regenerative. My parents were sort of leaders in the organic movement in the U.S. starting 40 years ago. They wrote some of the first organic standards. And so I have been part of the sustainable ag movement for basically my entire life. I've watched organic come and go. I've seen local. There was permaculture. There's agroecology. There's regenerative is, I consider it to be a fad. I knew the guys who founded, and still know them, the guys who founded Kiss the Ground, which was, people probably familiar with Kiss the Ground from LA. They happened to know a bunch of influencers in Hollywood, and they were like, this carbon thing's important, climate's important, let's tell the world about regenerative. I'm like, guys, first thing is figure out what you're talking about first. And like, regenerative, we're going to just put the energy behind regenerative. And so I see it to be a bit of a fad, a bit of a religion. Like, is Christianity good? Well, I mean, you can claim Christianity and be a complete hypocrite and be doing all kinds of atrocious things, or you can be following the precepts of Christ and be really a beautiful person. So what is regenerative? I really appreciate Christine's comment about it being results-based, not practice-based. Doing 5 Hail Marys does not mean that you are aligned with what Christ taught. And so this is, again, to my argument about the nutritional quality of the food being the objective, and there being a continuum-based standard, as opposed to thou art regenerative or thou art not regenerative. I say thine tomato is a 20 out of 100 or an 80 out of 100. And that is the relevant point, because it sure looks like the nutritional caliber of the food connects completely directly to soil health, to ecosystem function, to farm viability, to human health. And if we can, understand that there's a broad suite of allies that could build a social movement globally together around these issues of climate and human health and small farmer viability and everything else, there's an amazing opportunity. So I think what we call things, having names, if we don't define them, if we don't have ways of measuring them, if they aren't based on continuums as opposed to binaries, they will get lost, they'll get sideswiped, they'll sort of lose their momentum. So I really appreciate the ethos behind the regenerative movement deeply, which is about looking at our traumatized, colonized, dysfunctional, reductionist, frame, and working to build the symbiotic, function instead, to heal ourselves, our inner selves, as well as the ecosystem. I think the deep impulse behind regenerative is profound and really a beautiful thing. But if it gets converted into, we've planted cover crops, therefore we can get a certification label, that's a perversion.
Thank you. Dan, still agree, but now let's start the collision question. Oh, here comes the blood, guys. Everybody, you mentioned agenda, tool design. So how regenerative agriculture can work? I will list 4 different business models. Eventually, feel free to add a new one. Or tell me what, in your opinion, can win and which one is a trap. So, premium consumer brand with nutrient density or Regag certified products, corporate supply chain commitment, or almost every food behemoth is rebuilding the tier 1 supplying on Regan practice, carbon and ecosystem service market on public policy and subsidy redirected. Christine, in your opinion, which one can win, or which one can be a trap?
I mean, frankly, I think it's a combination of all of these things.
Okay.
Oh my gosh, how safe am I here? But I will, because you wanted us to have a collision here, I'm going to say that I think architecting corporate and consumer pull is a huge lever. And this is a lot of the work that I'm doing right now. As I have mentioned several times, putting the onus on farmers is not going to work, right? They are operating, unfortunately, on such thin margins that investing in the short-term costs that can lead to the long-term, cost savings and benefits in the market, it's not realistic for most farmers. And so what we're doing is helping the buyers of products from the farms help the farmer invest in the transition. And they're doing that, and that could be a food company, for example. It can also be a government. But why would they do that? It is because they need more secure supply chains, and they need better quality products that they can market to consumers. So that consistency and reliability of their supply chains is enhanced through, better on-farm outcomes. And like I said, through these interventions, for example, better soil health leads to nutrient density, your term that's coined, of course, we have to back that up with science. It leads to, oftentimes we've seen in some of our interventions in Mexico with biochar, that it leads to better tasting products in citrus, like oranges and things like this, less waste, better disease prevention. So there's all kinds of benefits. And I think like making the buyers, helping them enable that transition, everybody wins. And back to my previous work, you know, with innovators around the world, they're also looking for pathways to scale. And originally, a lot of these startups, if they're a biochar or vermicompost startup or a digital solution, MRV solution, they were trying to sell to farmers and, you know, unable to get buyers. And now, oftentimes, these food companies are investing in their solution to be deployed on the farm. So they get a scaling pathway, farmers get you know, channel to sell, and consumers get a healthier, better tasting, you know, more secure and stable product.
Thank you, Christine. In the next question, we'll come back to the value chain, because you started a nice and interesting discussion. I wonder, that's now, what do you think about the business model can work?
Actually, because you mentioned, I think I call up the chain commitments as well. So I won't pick all of them, and Christine's kind of addressed that very eloquently. But what does up the chain commitments mean? I mean, Dan mentioned as well, I mean, the current model that's wholly economically driven, capital markets driven, I would argue is broken. And more broadly, I mean, we're seeing, I've been in finance over 30 years, that the financial system is being rewired, right? Kind of debasement, inflation, costs post-COVID. We're seeing that both for foodstuffs and every day as well. So we're all getting squeezed, right, by that. So how do we address this? It's quite interesting, because we found initially when we started to look at the cryptocurrency side and other areas, a lot of it was just speculation, right? But now there's a big drive on the digital asset side for real world assets. All of a sudden you're seeing kind of that crypto side converge with real economy. Now, what does that mean in practice? We've got companies like Tether, which are the largest issuer of a stable coin, you know, digital instrument backed by US dollar primarily, but they're going up the value chain. Initially, they started with gold, but recently as well, they bought an Argentinian agricultural company as well. So they're beginning to realize that there's a yield and there's opportunity to finance that yield, because actually, I mean, the financing gap in this space doesn't run into just billions of dollars a year, it's multi-trillion trillions of dollars a year. So you've got large pools of capital now on the digital side that isn't getting any return. And those investors are willing to pool that capital into these sorts of areas that generate that return. So this is an area that we've really started to focus on. And yes, it started small. I think 10 million, 20 million, 30 million. But I think the horse has bolted now, and that's genuinely going to scale. And actually, it's more competitive, accessible, faster. You know, just to give you one example, when we try and when someone sells produce and they try and get payment in bank instruments, or just let's say an MT103 SWIFT transfer, sometimes they're waiting 5 to 7 days depending on the interjurisdiction between the buyers that might be in developed nations and the sellers in developing. The banks, every course, there might be 3 or 4 banks involved, because the correspondent banks are taking money all the way across that cycle. So time and cost. With a stable coin, you can do that in a fraction of the cost. So commodity cycles have increased from, let's say, 2 times a month to 4 times a month as well.
Thank you, Hirander. Dan, what's your opinion about that?
Well, as the person who coined the term nutrient density, I always have a bias to your question. I'm not in favor of the price premium framing of nutrient density. My understanding is that your cost of production goes down as the biological system function improves. And so I don't think I think we can absolutely outcompete the chemistry paradigm of agriculture as we understand more well how to work with nature. I think I agree with Christine, the pull through, both from the corporate side and from the consumer side, is the strategy. We were talking yesterday about legislation and policy, and my cynical American perspective is that governments are corrupt and that the market is what drives things. And so it would be wonderful if there were governments that let facts be their guides, but it seems to me that's not the case. And so I think the deal with the fact that money is a powerful force see if we can align economic incentive with ecological benefit, with human health benefit, with cultural benefit. So that would be my suggestion. I do have a personal philosophical issue with the agglomeration of resource to a small few. I think that we have a lot of wisdom from traditional cultural perspective, which framed it as we belong to the land, not that the land belongs to us. And I think that as long as we're operating from a cultural framework which says we can, accomplish dominance and control through accumulation for our private selves, we are not going to be accomplishing that deeper regenerative spirit of healing ourselves and getting out of this colonized paradigm. But that maybe is a tangent to the deeper conversation.
Thank you. Dan, let's stay in the line of the supply chain. Let's draw an easy value chain. So we have the farmers, so they experience yield reduction for some years, capex for equipment and seeds, so they pay the price. Food behemoths, food companies that invest a lot and they have a return on investment. Consumers that are absolutely unwilling to pay a premium price for reject, despite huge investment in marketing. But who pays the price for regenerative agriculture?
This is a really good question. I mean, your question sort of, I think, belies some of the false storylines. I'll use beef as an example. Our organization has been working to define nutrient density as a 1 to 100 standard with biomarkers based on a direct empirical connection between soil health, plant health, animal health, and human health. And we think that through big data, through algorithms, through pattern forming, we can find the patterns of nature through the scientific method and say these things are intrinsically interrelated. With beef as an example, the dominant paradigm in the States, where I come from, is that farmers are tilling up land, they're planting seeds with fertilizers, spraying with chemicals, harvesting with combines, and then taking that corn and feeding it to cows and feedlots. And that's the way that beef is produced, which is extraordinarily cost heavy, right? There's all kinds of things the farmers have to buy to do that. Well, guess what? If you have a perennial polyculture, a multi-speciated, diverse ecosystem, and you simply cut those grasses and you pile them up under a piece of plastic and let them ferment, right? It's kind of like sauerkraut. It's called haylage. The cows can finish at the same speed. At 16 to 18 months, they can be at slaughter weight. They can have the same marbling, which gives you the premium and choice, cut. It's a 1 to 1 omega-3 to omega-6 ratio as opposed to an 8 to 1 or 12 to 1, which is profoundly more health beneficial for the human. Right? There's no tractors needed for plowing. There's no seed purchase. There's no fertilizer purchase. There's no chemical purchase. There's no combine. Right? So it actually is much less expensive to produce much higher quality food, which is much more ecologically beneficial, and much more of the cash from the meat goes to the farmer as opposed to the corporates in the middle. So it is, I completely disagree with the concept that farmers need to lose money for a while to engage in a transition. I think we need to actually understand systemically what we're doing, and if we do understand what we're doing, we can dramatically decrease cost of production, improve ecosystem function, improve human health.
But then do you think that probably is the perception that in fact is perceived as a cost and not like an investment? You told me that there is real return for farmers. Probably the challenge could be even to present it as an investment and not as a cost, because in Italy this is a huge challenge. I don't know if in the US scenario if it's something that can work this.
I think this can work anywhere globally. I think the issue, I like what Misra's working on with the blockchain, which is entirely different than cryptocurrency, by the way, for those who don't know the difference. Blockchain is one thing, crypto is different. The blockchain, the sort of the ledger where everything that's put in is can be confirmed and read later. Like, my proposition is, if we can work to build the open data infrastructure where the practices and the results that anyone engaged can be seen by everyone everywhere, the knowledge, which is, I would argue, the impediment, the lack of knowledge. The farmers don't know what the things are that they actually need to do to optimize system function. If we can say every farm is a research farm, right? Instead of doing replicated randomized trials, we actually collect the data that's happening everywhere and have it be all the data, the management practices, the fertility programs, the costs, the profits, the pest pressure, all that stuff. We can together, working in the model of nature, which is symbiosis, right? Nature does not do I win by you losing. Nature does I win by everyone around me winning. And we have to build our structures in the pattern of nature if we want to succeed in the regenerative ethos. We need to understand that when we're engaging in the colonizing structures of profit and control, we are missing the point.
Well, what do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, it's really, really interesting. I mean, just to touch on the earlier point, I mean, when we talk about segregation of land, I mean, that happened from colonization where, if we look, we're working with some of the, again, Native American Indian reservations and some of the organizations there, and land was communal, right? And I absolutely agree. The problem we've now got is when you say who pays for this, actually, I mean, going back to what Christine said as well, and Dan, I mean, it's the end farmer, the one taking the most risk that is paying for this at the moment because they're being so squeezed downstream. I mean, not just with the middlemen, but also corporates now with, and by the way, I'm a capitalist through and through, but I'm about sustainable capitalism. But we've been so far squeezed where it's been all about profits, quarterly profits, half-yearly annual returns, because by virtue, markets are very short-termist. Every CEO is looking at those results so that the share price goes up, right? But the problem is, again, the communities and the farmers themselves have suffered. So use of these technologies, and we say, okay, blockchain for the sake of blockchain doesn't really matter, but actually cutting out those bad middlemen. And we're not saying all middlemen are bad because some actually increase liquidity and distribution in markets. But it's those bad actors that are profiting at the benefit of others that are taking the risk that's creating the challenge. And ultimately, you're laying the goose that lays the golden egg, right? Because you speak about Italy, but in the UK, milk farmers, cow farming for milk is shutting down at a rate of knots because those farmers can't afford it. The supermarkets are pushing down the prices so much. There's no margins in that business anymore. So who's going to supply the milk? We're going to be flying it in, right? Or it's going to be packaged like you get elsewhere. So there's a genuine problem here, and it's coming upon us faster than we think. But there are solutions to solve this that we've all discussed.
Thank you. And what do you think about it, Christine?
Yeah, I really liked the point that you made around reframing this as an investment and not a cost. And we have to realize that the food system that we have now has been heavily invested in, heavily subsidized, systems that are in place that are entrenched, right? And, farmers right now are in many of the growing regions of the world, growing monocultures, monocrops, and they're part of a commodity-based system. And so there is a transition that needs to happen. And there's one point, which we've touched upon, that regenerative ag is a movement from the ground up. And, this grassroots mobilization is exciting to see. Yes, there have been a lot of ideologies that have been, co-opted in this movement, which is, a reality. But I think it is creating, especially with the next generation, a groundswell of interest and an excitement about what the future food system can look like. But I also equally think if we reframe from cost to investment, we need a top-down approach too. What do I mean by that? I just had a piece come out in the Columbia Journal of International Affairs arguing that food security is national security, and we need to treat it like that with the budgets and the timelines that sectors like AI and semiconductors are treated with. And when I did my thesis way back when in graduate school, I studied security and defense economics as a subset of science and technology policy and analyzed the United States' approach to agricultural prominence. With the Morrill Act, they set in motion the land-grant university system. It was launched during the Civil War, a period of, serious vulnerability in the country. But President Lincoln at the time said, we will continue to be vulnerable as a country if we are reliant on imports and if we cannot feed our people. And so that vision was actually, it's posited to be one of the first national innovation strategies of the US, put in place the land-grant university system and the research agenda to deliver on this vision of being a producer and a science and technology-based society that would not be reliant on food imports. What is the version of that vision today for countries to set in motion? I believe it should be around regeneration, and it should be around health and well-being. And when you set that as a national security ambition, then you can build the new system underneath to deliver that. And that's going to be a combination of research, entrepreneurship, investment, policies, and all of that can set in motion the structures and the systems that we need to unlock this vision of Food 3.0, I call it, which is, science-enabled regeneration. So.
Thank you. I would like to add, then we go to rapid fire.
Just a very quick point here, and I mean, we look at this as well because, Christine's absolutely right. Commodities are being exported, and the raw commodity has a much lower value than anything value added as well. And then some of these countries, we do some work with Ghana. They're struggling now, given fuel prices and everything else, to import diesel, and they don't have enough foreign reserve. Malawi suffered a lot as well, because they're reliant on about $1 billion a year from USAID, and so they had an aid reliance rather than producing. So we're encouraging now, and you're right, governments aren't easy to deal with as well because there's vested interest all the way throughout governments. But we're trying to encourage, with a commercially driven approach, value-added production on the ground. I mean, just to give an example, Ghana's a huge cocoa producer, again, one of the largest in the world. They have milk, etc. But Swiss chocolate sells at a premium, right? And yet Ghana produces nothing, just exports the cocoa. So I think there's a big opportunity. Yeah, there's a big opportunity for value addition on the ground. And fundamentally, I mean, that will reduce import reliance because, I mean, they're exporting and then they're buying back this expensive product at much more, right?
Okay, Dan, would you like to add something to it?
Just a couple examples from my time here in Italy recently, teaching courses to farmers and in Europe here. Just to the point about subsidies, as I understand it, the EU subsidizes farms at about €1,000 a hectare, and if you do the math on what the average farmer makes, it is the size of their subsidy, and that effectively there's net no profit in the sale of their food, the sale of the commodity they produce. And so really it's a scheme to get the farmers to buy tractors, to buy fertilizer, because the money that the subsidy pays for goes to purchase the products of industry which engage this industrial model. And so the government is actually actively supporting this industrial model. It is at the root, like if we just were to remove subsidies, we would actually have a market. And right now, there's a finger on the scale which is supporting the perverse paradigm. An example here was I was teaching a course a little bit, I think it was a little bit to the west of here, and they were talking about how it's illegal to have chickens. They can't have a chicken tractor, they can't have chickens running around because of bird flu. There's these industrial chicken producing buildings which have 10,000 birds in them or 100,000 birds in them, and because it's so unnatural, because there's antibiotics and everything else applied, these birds have no immune system, and nature is coming in and trying to take them out and say you are unfit for reproduction. This thing we call bird flu is nature's way of taking out which is unfit, which is producing food which is unfit for people to eat. And so because the industrial model is trying to, wants to support itself, it says remove chickens in nature from the environment because they are a vector for bird flu. But the logic path would then say, remove all birds from the environment. Remove all ducks, remove all geese, remove all robins and pigeons, because all birds are vectors for bird flu. Right? There's preposterous, ridiculous, illogical structures in place that support the perverse paradigm that we've got. So it's just a context point, is like, there's a really heavy finger on the scale to support the non-regenerative dynamic.
Okay. Yeah, Christine, then let's go with the rapid closing.
Yeah, well, I just wanted to react a little bit. I mean, the point is agreed, like elimination of subsidies would create catalytic, change, of course. But we have a system, and we have to understand that that system is entrenched, and people get scared, and they're scared of winners and losers when change comes, right? And so something that I think we have to be cognizant of as leaders and change makers in this space is how we can understand the different interests of different stakeholders in the system and guide them through transformation in a way that maximizes benefits and doesn't make people feel excluded as losers, in whatever change happens. And the Common Agricultural Policy here in Europe, I mean, many farmers are very, very reliant on it. So coming in and saying we're going to get rid of this, because we have this better system, they're going to fight against that, right? And so you have to bring them through a transformation conversation. And I've been following very closely, the kind of new regulations embodied in the Green Deal here. And unfortunately, this was also just a leadership misstep, frankly. It's like, okay, European Union, we're going to step up and we're going to be global leaders in climate change. And farmers immediately felt, wait a second, you're taking away our livelihoods by banning products that we rely on and not approving new products that can help us be competitive in the market. And so this to me was just a leadership misstep. We need to think about the fact that we need systems change, but system change requires a new type of leadership skill set that leads people through it.
We have just time, 1 minute each one. Let's to condensate in a nutshell the great opinion you shared during this panel. Oh, Christine, what? Dan. Yeah, Dan. What next steps? What the error to be avoided, and the next step for regenerative agriculture? How do you see regenerative agriculture in 5 years?
I'd like to reframe it as nutrient density. I like to reframe it as high quality food for all, ecosystem functionality. I think the next steps are to define success, to define nutrition, to define the quality of food, to open source the causal factors that correlate with that, and to bring that to all farmers on all scales globally. Only when we have the knowledge, we have the framework for sharing that knowledge, only when we have a definition of success that is a continuum based as opposed to a binary, will we actually have the framework necessary for the market to pull through success.
Okay, thank you. Design framework. Hirander, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about circular economy, but we're using certain examples like the Kenyan example that I gave with Captagat as a whole definition in terms of steps and the 7 C's that I mentioned in terms of that circularity. And Christine's right. A lot of that also comes from education as well, and awareness, and that can be, not just research based, but how that's practically applied on the ground. It took quite a bit to say, okay, you can chop down this tree, right, and there's firewood, and you can sell that, and there's an income, but how do you replace that? And there's also a challenge, right, because short term, there's always a lag when you put in place these programs before they start generating income. And so how do you address that gap? And so we're encouraging investors to say, okay, just don't look at short-term gains and short-term yield. There's a medium term, but at the same time, we're trying to map that with other projects that are already producing that can then give them that shorter-term yield, but at the same time, then invest some of that into medium-term yield.
Thank you. Hirander, that's rapid fire close for you, Christine?
Yeah, I think this is the most exciting time to reconnect people with their food, to treat regeneration as strategic infrastructure, invest in it with that mindset, and make it happen. We've never had more incredible tools, to facilitate. We have just right now a leadership and vision challenge, so I think we can solve that.
Thank you. Guys, great panel with different opinions, but everybody should agree on the needs is to create a framework, so something that can work, that can deliver value and return on everybody. Thank you, guys. It was a big pleasure, and see you. Thank you, guys, even for your presence.